It is Tuesday, March 16th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. We are in the heat of NFL free agency right now with names big and small finding new teams. That means plenty of fantasy excitement, either real or fabricated. You can track all that movement through the Shark Bite section on draftsharks.com. But the NFL draft is also getting closer, just a little bit more than a month away now. That makes it one of the most exciting times of year for dynasty leagues. And with that in mind, I wanted to bring in a dynasty specialist to talk rookie drafts and more. He is a co-owner of dynastyleaguefootball.com. You can find him on the DLF podcast, the Locked On Dynasty podcast, the Commission Impossible podcast with Scott Fish, and probably picking in front of you in a draft room right now. He is at RyanMC23 on Twitter. Ryan McDowell, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Thanks for having me on. Ready to talk some rookies.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Before we get to any football, though, can I ask you the significance of the 23 in your Twitter handle?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up a Yankees fan, so 23 is Donnie baseball.
Absolutely. I wondered the same thing. That was my first favorite number for the same reason, because I have family on Long Island and started watching Don Mattingly. So 23 was a number of mine then. Became a Cubs fan, so it was Ryan Sandberg's number then, so it just kind of cemented it. And I wondered, I was curious if it was Michael Jordan, which it was for most people in our age bracket, but I was hopeful.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Of course, everybody always thinks with the age range, and obviously he's the more famous number 23. But yeah, I'm a big Mattingly fan, big Yankees fan.
Awesome. So, of course, what I come to you and DLF for this time of year, especially, is to take the pulse of the fantasy landscape on these incoming rookies. How long have you been running those rookie mock drafts through DLF, and can you describe how they work for anybody who's not familiar?
Sure. So we use my fantasy league to host our mock drafts every year and really every month. So I host Dynasty Startup mock drafts every single month, including the regular season. And then this time of year, from February through May, we also host rookie drafts. So 10 Superflex mock drafts, 10 one quarterback mock drafts, and really just want to get as much data out there as possible. And of course, there's a few leagues drafting their rookie drafts this early. You can find them occasionally, but not many. So to really kind of get an early picture of what the rookie value might be, I think mock drafts is the best way to do that this time of year. So yeah, we host those every month and fill up 20 rookie mocks every single month. It's a pretty fun time.
Yeah, it seems like it. Now, what's your personal preference for when to do that rookie drafting? Are you one of those hardcore guys that wants to do it before these guys have NFL draft landing spots? Or are you like, I want to add in the where he landed component to my personal rankings?
Yeah, I definitely don't mind it. I'm in a couple of those leagues, those hardcore leagues, as you say, where we do draft before the NFL draft. And I'm also in quite a few Devy leagues where you draft players when they're in college, developmental leagues. So between those, I've got a lot of rooting interest on draft night and on draft weekend, hoping my guys land in the right spot or get that preferred draft capital. But yeah, I think for most dynasty players, it makes sense to draft soon after the NFL draft.
I was going to say, with that Devy component, you probably feel a little bit like you're watching some of your kids to see where they're going to be spending their careers, huh?
Yeah. I mean, some of these guys, you've had them on your roster for 3 or 4 years, potentially, if you draft them, maybe even before they start their college career. So yeah, they do feel like a part of the family after a while. And, the Devy hit rate is pretty scary, as you might imagine, especially when you're drafting those kids that are still in high school.
I'm sure. How much do the rankings that come out of those mock drafts at this time of the year, how much do you tend to see those change right after the NFL draft and when guys land on teams and in, particular rounds?
It's a pretty massive change. So as I said, we're doing rookie mock drafts, but we're also doing startup mock drafts. And that's where you really see the change. If you're doing a dynasty startup draft right now or anytime before the NFL draft, you can really profit just by hammering those rookies. I looked at the top 10 rookies from last year, and of course that's a pretty special class, but of those top 10 rookies, looking at their April ADP to their May ADP, every single one of them went up. Every single one gained value from April to May. So we're, of course, talking pre-draft to post-draft. And the average jump was 14 spots. So we're talking about more than one round in a dynasty startup draft. It won't be any surprise. Clyde Edwards-Helaire jumped 40 spots in 1 month. Let's see. J.K. Dobbins jumped 20 spots. Jalen Reagor jumped 27 spots. And maybe coincidence or not, 2 of those guys we could probably consider pretty big disappointments after their rookie year.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Clyde Edwards-Helaire's family even loved him more after he got drafted by the Chiefs in round 1. How much do you find that your personal rookie rankings changed after the draft in general? Well, actually, before we get to that, you talked about last year's class being special. Have you seen rookies go any earlier in dynasty startups so far this year after we had that class last year?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an impact. We're seeing a lot of the incoming rookies, the 2021 rookies, being drafted very highly. But I still think there's some meat on the bone. There's some value there to be had. Travis Etienne, 37 overall. I think he's almost a lock to increase and gain value on that number. Jamar Chase right behind him at 39 overall. And then you've got kind of the 2 unicorns of this class, Kyle Pitts, 56 overall, and Trevor Lawrence, 87 overall. And that is in a 1 quarterback league. So I think all 4 of those players certainly will gain some value and be moving up post-draft.
Mm-hmm. Now, we'll talk about Trevor Lawrence in a minute, but do you, in your personal rankings and your colleagues at DLF, do you guys find that your rankings change as significantly or nearly as significantly after the NFL draft, compared with what's happening in the mock drafts from those 2 different periods?
I don't know if I've ever compared it that way, but you have to react obviously to landing spots, to draft capital. I will admit I'm one that got caught in the Hakeem Butler hype, a couple of years ago. So when we think he's wide receiver 1 and the NFL tells us he's not, obviously you have to react to that. And really, I think those are the smarter reactions, moving players down rather than bumping players way up. And again, back to CEH, maybe we learned that lesson again last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the tough part about this, because sometimes you do need to just stick to it and say, no, the NFL got this wrong. This guy's going to do something. But you also have to bake in some humility and say, all right, I like Hakeem Butler a little bit too much. If I thought he was going late round 1 and he went round 5, I think I was probably the one who was wrong. Right.
And, as 15 years ago, as kind of a young dynasty player, I remember being, stubborn. That, in fact, I would kind of brag about it, that I've got my pre-draft rankings and I'm leaving those set. Those are not changing due to the draft. And obviously, not only do we have to consider draft capital, but we have to consider landing spot as well. And it's really just silly to ignore that.
How much has the demand for Superflex content and drafts increased over the past couple of years?
Yeah, massively. I know, along with my work at DLF, I also help out Scott Fish run the safe leagues for Fanball. And I know Scott has said he doesn't even open 1 quarterback dynasty leagues anymore because he just can't consistently fill them and fill many of them. So yeah, Superflex certainly kind of in our dynasty niche is growing every single year and has almost become the preferred option.
And of course, I would imagine anybody listening knows Superflex is where a quarterback can also be a flex player that has seemed to explode in popularity in best ball drafting and dynasty on FFPC. I know we play those a lot now. So it brings Trevor Lawrence and others into greater focus in this class. I guess, first of all, do you like having Superflex be a bigger participant in the fantasy landscape and kind of give quarterbacks more importance? Because before the past couple of years, we'd be like, yeah, he's the number 1 quarterback, so you could probably take him early in round 2 of your rookie draft.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely love it. And I'm kind of to that point as well that I don't really want to play in the league, a dynasty league, unless it's Superflex or really any fantasy league, honestly. I think a lot of the same things could be said about redraft as far as, the late round quarterback and just the value being flat across that position. So when you add in that second quarterback, either through a super flex position or a required 2 QB league, then you're giving value to a huge portion of your player pool, right? And and this season specifically, absolutely, Trevor Lawrence 101, no question about it.
Yeah, so you called him a unicorn a few minutes ago. You think he is that far ahead of the rest of the group?
I really do, and it kind of feels like, it feels like Justin Fields is going back to the group. I think he was the original favorite to be the 102, not only in the NFL draft, but in dynasty rookie drafts as well, in those super flex leagues. It seems like the offseason has not been great for him, or this pre-draft process. Maybe it's Zach Wilson instead. Maybe it's Trey Lance. Whoever it is, I think there's a pretty significant gap between Lawrence and the rest of them.
Yeah, to me, it seems like the downside of Justin Fields has been fabricated a bit. I mean, I'm not a film scout. I'm not an NFL scout, but I did post our scouting reports for both Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, as well as Trey Lance. To me, Justin Fields looks like, from a fantasy standpoint, we'll see about their real life success, but from a fantasy standpoint, in terms of upside, I don't think there's a huge gap between Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And I mean, even in real life terms, there hasn't been that huge gap between them from the time that they were right next to each other in the recruiting rankings.
Right.
They both landed at big schools. They both had success at big schools. The last time we saw Justin Fields, he got clobbered and still crushed Trevor Lawrence's team in the national semifinal. So I'm not sure what Justin Fields did since then to make so many people mad.
Yeah, I'm really not either. I feel, we do this every year at this time, right? We overanalyze these guys and we dig in maybe a little too much. And I'm with you. In Justin Fields' case, he's still the quarterback 2 for me in this class from a fantasy standpoint. And as far as the NFL draft, I mean, if I'm the Jets, I'm taking him, no question.
Yeah, and if I'm the Jets and I'm thinking about taking Zach Wilson, I don't want to talk badly about Zach Wilson because I don't dislike him, but I'm worried that if I take him ahead of Justin Fields, that I might be taking Mitchell Trubisky with Deshaun Watson still there on the board.
Yep, I agree. I thought that's where you might be going. And that, I'm the same way. I'm a little more confident in Wilson than I was in Trubisky years ago. And of course that's easy to say now. Right. But yeah, I would totally agree with what you said there. So yeah, it's Fields for me.
Now beyond I guess you also called Kyle Pitts a unicorn. So let's talk about him for a second. The gap, I don't think anybody would argue the gap between him and the rest of the position.
Well, yeah, and it's not just the gap between he and the other rookie tight ends. We're seeing a gap already going back to those dynasty startup mock drafts. He's our tight end 4 in ADP already in dynasty startup. So of course you have Kittle and Kelsey at the top. Darren Waller has slotted in kind of almost in his own tier at tight end 3. But then it's Kyle Pitts ahead of Hawkinson, ahead of Fant, ahead of Mark Andrews, all these other guys in that range. So the hype is real on Kyle Pitts. I'm going to have a hard time buying where you would need to buy, which is probably 5 or 6 in rookie drafts, maybe 7. I just don't think I can do that for a tight end. Maybe if you've got a big tight end premium, some leagues I'm in, you have to start 2 tight ends. Of course, then he would be a consideration. Or if you get 2 PPR, 2 points per reception for a tight end catch, again, that would be a consideration. But in kind of a normal PPR league, it's just too rich for me.
Yeah. Where would he slot in for you in that first round? Because I mean, I don't think we're loaded on top shelf running backs or wide receivers. If we're talking about super flex or 2 QB, then that's going to push those quarterbacks further into that mix. But if it is just one quarterback, do you think Kyle Pitts makes sense right there in the middle of that first round?
It wouldn't be too much lower. I'm going to pull his numbers here. So he's 7 right now in our ADP. For me, it would be probably more like 9 or 10. So again, not far off, but you're just, you're kind of getting into the names. Rondale Moore is a guy behind Pitts right now that I would take ahead of him. Rashard Bateman, actually moved ahead of Pitts in our most recent ADP, but had initially been behind him. So I'd prefer both of those wide receivers. I think we'll see 3 running backs most likely go ahead of him. Of course, Najee Harris and Travis Etienne at the top. And there's been a lot of hype lately, deservedly so, I think, on Javonte Williams.
At least within the fantasy bubble on Twitter, Rashad Bateman has seemed like the yodeling mountain climber from The Price is Right, where he's just kind of moving up and people are singing about him the whole time over the past month or so.
Yeah, well, Bateman, I think it's deserved. It's so tough to analyze and to judge this class just because of the past year we've had, with some players playing, some players opting out, others playing half a season and then opting out. So it's really not an apples to apples conversation here. So Bateman opted out, opted back in, played a few games, and then ultimately opted out again. And I think initially that was one thing that kind of hurt his stock among dynasty players and probably among NFL draft scouts as well. But I think, we're looking back at his sophomore year when he had that breakout year, even with Tyler Johnson still there for Minnesota, and kind of remembering and reminding ourselves what Bateman can really do.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to see if he makes it into round 1 of the NFL draft, or if he's another one of those guys that fantasy folks end up liking better than the NFL, and what we do with that. We talk about guys that we end up liking better than the NFL clearly did, but it makes me remember Michael Thomas when he landed in round 2 with New Orleans as an example of somebody who did sink a little bit by NFL standards, but then he also landed in that place and got maybe should have gotten the Clyde Edwards-Helaire boost, maybe didn't get as much. I don't know. It doesn't really help us with anything right now. But it's one of those examples of something where you have to figure out whether to stick to your guns, whether to react to the draft position, and whether to react to NFL landing spot.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder. And, that wasn't that long ago. Yeah. We should have figured that out. I remember in one league, I had a middle of the pack first round pick and was choosing between Michael Thomas, who, like you said, I didn't really like coming in, but he's got the solid draft capital. He's got the great landing spot. And instead I chose Sterling Shepard. And, of course I'm kicking myself for that one now, but I don't know. I maybe over the years we've leaned more on that landing spot, especially for those first 3 players picked in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, every situation is going to be different. There are going to be guys we miss on all the time, and we kick ourselves about looking backward. At least, it's a player like Sterling Shepard who's at least still been productive, and it wasn't like Dorial Green Beckham.
Oh, yeah, that one was a bad one too.
That's a name that I like to throw out in dynasty circles.
Too many bad names on here. I fell for that one too.
That's right. So who are your favorites in this class? You mentioned having Kyle Pitts a little bit lower than where ADP does. What's your read right now? What's your position of strength or favorite players?
I'm just really, really in love with this wide receiver class, as plenty of people are. It's deep and it's top heavy at the same time. I mentioned Jamar Chase earlier. He's 39 overall in our startup ADP. But interestingly enough, he's first overall in that rookie ADP. So in startup, he's falling behind the running backs, both Harris and Etienne. In rookie drafts, he's ahead of them. And that kind of makes sense. I see the difference. In rookie drafts, we're typically basing more on, on talent and maybe that long-term view. In startups, managers feel like they've got to get the running backs. So sometimes in those startup drafts, we do see rookie running backs higher than they might go in a rookie draft. So Chase would be one I definitely think will be gaining value even at his lofty value already. Rondell Moore, I mentioned already, and Rashad Bateman. Those are my wide receivers 2 and 3. I've got some doubts. I'm with the people who are doubting the both Alabama wide receivers. So that's going to be another conversation of how much are we valuing draft capital? Because if we're to believe everything we've heard, both of those guys are going to be first round picks and potentially high first round picks, talking about Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle. Again, those are probably 2 I would be avoiding And then even the wide receivers, once you get into likely the second round of rookie drafts, Tylan Wallace is a guy I really like. Terrace Marshall's probably going to be on that border, late first, early second rounder, which is actually probably the same range he'll be in the NFL draft.
Mm-hmm. And of course, their Alabama teammate, you talked about Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle just last year. Henry Ruggs is a good example of the other side of maybe sticking to your guns as opposed to reacting to what the NFL says. When Henry Ruggs goes first off the board among all wide receivers, and there was varying opinions. I know my colleague Jared was not high on Henry Ruggs. I know I wasn't excited about most of the components for Henry Ruggs' profile. So that was a case where it's a good idea to stick to your guns and say, I don't like Henry Ruggs, I'm going to let somebody else take him. And it ended up working out so far. It's 1 year in, so he might be a stud still. But, just kind of an example of that other side of sticking to your guns can work out sometimes.
Yeah, and we did see dynasty players stick to their guns. Ruggs, after the NFL draft, did gain some value last year. But looking at our ADP data from May of last year, he was still the 11th pick in the first round and the 5th wide receiver drafted. So he was behind CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Reagor, and Justin Jefferson, even though he was the wide receiver 1 in the NFL draft. So he gained some value, but I would say in general, like you said, dynasty managers did stick with their guns and didn't raise him too much based on that.
And I think in his case too, it's not so much a sign of fantasy players being stubborn, but being smart. I mean, in this case, probably smarter than the Raiders is the signs. Obviously he's fast. Obviously he's productive. Obviously he's from Alabama, but the production, the market shares, the things that have been shown to matter for NFL production didn't point to Henry Ruggs being a good selection as the first wide receiver off the board last year. And fantasy players are like, okay, I like him a little bit better now because the Raiders are probably going to give him every chance to succeed, but I still don't love him. So I'm not going to vault him ahead of Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb or anybody else here.
Yeah, actually years ago, this reminds me of a study I did and an article I did for DLF. I called it Drafting Like the Pros. And I looked at players like Henry Ruggs, where there was such a gap in where they were drafted in the NFL versus where they were drafted in dynasty rookie drafts. And of course, the gap for Ruggs in that case would be 5 or 4 spots from wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 5. And typically I found that the dynasty players were more successful, meaning players like Ruggs finished closer to that range where he was drafted in dynasty drafts versus higher in the NFL draft.
That's interesting. How many years ago did you say that was?
That's probably been 3 or 4 years ago. I need to dust that one off and see what the recent numbers say.
Well, it just makes you wonder too if we are all, collectively just using analytics more effectively still even than the NFL is, or maybe it's just a few franchises that are kind of lagging behind in that area, to be fair.
Yeah, and they would certainly be one of them, unfortunately.
Are there any key mistakes that you think are widespread still among dynasty players, specifically in rookie drafts at this point, or just in valuing rookie picks even?
I think going back to the Superflex format, we're still seeing quarterbacks fall too far. If you play in Superflex dynasty leagues, you know how hard it is to acquire not just starting quarterbacks, but especially young starting quarterbacks. So if you get a chance to draft one, you should do it. We saw Justin Herbert fall to the second round regularly last year, despite being a top 10 pick by a quarterback needy team. We saw the same thing the year before with Daniel Jones. You can argue how that one worked out. And the year before that, it was Josh Allen, who not only fell sometimes to the second round, but even fell to the third round sometimes because he just became that hot potato player that nobody wanted to draft because everybody told us how bad he was. So I don't know who that'll be this year. I don't think we really have a quarterback fitting in that range this year. But the quarterback 5 most likely will be Mac Jones. And, there's some disagreement on what to expect from him on the NFL level. And just because the depth of the class and he doesn't offer much as a runner or really anything as a runner, honestly, I could see him falling to the second round again in super flex leagues.
Mm-hmm. How much do you value the running for those quarterbacks? Because, I mean, you mentioned Justin Herbert, you mentioned Josh Allen. Things could have looked a lot different for either of those guys, even Daniel Jones to a lesser degree, without the rushing ability. So I think when you take that away from Mac Jones, that is probably going to hurt him and make him drop maybe even into round 3, even if he sneaks into the first round of NFL drafts. But is he maybe more of an example of somebody who should slip a little bit and there's not, something special about him, even long-term?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I certainly would see a gap between he and the other 4. And part of the reason for that is what he does offer or doesn't offer as a runner. You just look at the top 6 or 8 quarterbacks right now in DLF ADP and in most rankings: Mahomes, Allen, Watson, Murray, Lamar Jackson. Those are all guys who are going to give you some upside on the ground as well. Trevor Lawrence can do that also. So I think it has to be a huge part of your decision-making when looking at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and we're getting more of those guys every year. Another 4 at least coming in this year. So pretty soon everybody's going to have a running, throwing quarterback. It's a fun time.
It's a copycat league, right?
Do you have any later favorite sleepers among this rookie class?
Yeah, we can find some. Let's see. I really like, and I can't believe he's even a later guy. I thought he would be going much higher, but Trey Sermon, the Ohio State running back, going right now in the late second round. I thought he would be more of a late first rounder, and maybe we'll eventually see him move up some, but like him for sure. A couple of guys, we were talking about Kyle Pitts, the tight end 2, tight end 3, Pat Freiermuth, Brevin Jordan, both of those guys going late second, early third round. And those are potentially, first round NFL draft picks. Probably won't happen, but probably more like early day 2 guys. But still, I think sometimes you were talking about mistakes we make in the draft. Sometimes we write off those tight ends too much, thinking about the long transition they have to the NFL, to relevance in the league. So I like both of those. I'm a Kentucky guy, and while I'm not a Louisville football fan, I'm kind of interested in the pair of players they have: Javian Hawkins, the running back from Louisville, and their wide receiver Tutu Atwell. Both of those guys are looking like third or fourth rounders, and most likely day 3 picks in the NFL.
I enjoy having somebody on the pod who takes some of the vowels out of Louisville, by the way. And as a Kentucky guy, let me say, I was wishing that the Eagles were in position years ago to draft Tim Couch instead of having Donovan McNabb. I have to admit, obviously, Donovan McNabb worked out over Tim Couch, but that year I was hoping Tim Couch could get to them, or I was hoping they would move down and take Dante Culpepper. Those were my 2 favorites in that class, and obviously it ended up working out just fine. I was not one of those folks at the draft or even at home yelling at the Eagles for taking the quarterback instead of Ricky Williams. But I have to admit that Donovan McNabb was not my first choice.
Yeah, Tim Couch, man, we're still a little disappointed with that one. Kentucky football doesn't have much to be proud of or happy about. It's gotten better over the past few years, I should say. It's not that bad lately, but to have the first overall draft pick is obviously pretty special, and then not to see it work out, it was disappointing.
At least the Randall Cobb jerseys shouldn't go out of style.
That's right. That's why I'm such a big Randall Cobb fan. He's kind of all we have.
There you go. Rookies aside, who are a couple of players that you are trying to buy in Dynasty this offseason?
I'm really sold on Cam Akers, and I think this rookie class from last year, we kind of hinted at it earlier, is just unbelievable. Right now, 4 of the top 12 players overall are from the class of 2020, 7 of the top 24. So we're talking about the first 2 rounds. 7 of those guys are from class of 2020, and Akers right now is a late first rounder. So he's not going to be cheap at all by any means, but I could see him being a top 3, top 5 running back by the end of the season. So trying to kind of buy high on Cam Akers, honestly. And I would say the same thing about CeeDee Lamb. I think he's got some room to grow when you look at rankings or ADP. He's in that second round range. But I expect him to be a first rounder by the end of next season.
Yeah, now it's interesting that you pick two high-level guys because usually people want to buy low, sell high, but if somebody's about to become a star, you're not going to get a whole bunch of chances to buy them. So do you find that you're often, just trying to buy your guys, whether it's low or high, you just have to kind of pay what's there as opposed to shying away from somebody who is priced like that?
Yeah, I mean, you're just talking about the reward, right? What's the ROI on this? And buying lows, always a great idea. I don't know how often it works out. But those two guys, even though they are very expensive already and very valuable already in dynasty leagues, are two that I'm super confident in. Mm-hmm. Even just a little bit lower, Austin Eckler, I think, is in for a huge year, and we've seen his value drop, probably because he's not viewed as that big name player. He's kind of almost kind of a boring player, even though he's anything but that on the field. But I'm just excited to see what he does with another year in that offense.
I think he's just different usage wise from what we're used to a top level running back looking like. So this time of year, everybody's like, yeah, last year was fun, but he can't do that again.
Right.
He got hurt last year. Now we have to worry about that. He's not going to catch 100 balls. So I don't know. I don't think it can happen.
Yeah, and one more I would throw in there is another kind of example of buying high, honestly, and another second-year player, T. Higgins. I think he's a top 7, top 8 dynasty wide receiver right now, and he's not really being valued that way. He is wide receiver 12 in our ADP, so another player that won't be cheap, but some room to grow.
And he could also be kind of a reminder to not worry too much about landing spot initially. I know that there were some who, when he landed in Cincinnati last year, was like, well, he's behind A.J. Green. He's behind Tyler Boyd. Who knows when he's going to get opportunities? Maybe I don't like him quite as much as I would have if he landed somewhere else. What was it, like week 3? He became a fantasy factor, and, good luck buying him. You have to pay a whole lot more at this point. Yeah. So it's another one of those where maybe it's good to stay stubborn on a guy that you like.
Well, it's funny that, we play Dynasty and we talk about a 3-year window, or some people even play with a 5-year window, which is kind of crazy. But, then it comes to the draft and we see these landing spots and we're throwing a guy away because, maybe he has a quiet start to his career, or maybe he is buried as a rookie. And even if that's the case, he's not done for his career.
Mm. On the other side, selling anybody who was holding A.J. Dillon, I've been saying to sell him. You kind of missed the window there when they re-signed Aaron Jones. Any other big guys, I guess, that, maybe it changed recently, or maybe just you came into the offseason looking to sell?
Yeah, I'm typically always selling the high-end running backs once they get to that certain point, whether it's usage or age. So I would be looking to sell both Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook this year. I continue to be worried about Dalvin Cook's injury history and just his ability to make it through a full season. And then Alvin Kamara, I don't think the loss of Drew Brees is going to be a good thing in any way for him. We know the story with Taysom Hill, if it's ultimately him playing quarterback for the Saints. But even if it's Jameis Winston that wins that job and is the quarterback, I see a pretty significant downgrade for Kamara and his usage and production overall. So both of those guys, I would be trying to move off of them. I talked about Cam Akers earlier. If I can go from one of those two guys to Cam Akers and get a little something thrown in, those are the types of deals I would be looking to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jameis Winston wasn't good for running back receptions in Tampa Bay before he played his way out of that job. So, yeah, either way, it certainly seems like a downgrade for Alvin Kamara from Drew Brees. And, yeah, we keep learning, maybe even faster than the NFL teams, that you shouldn't hold on to these running backs too long, even if you give up a year early. Is that your way? Is you'd rather give up a year too soon than hang on a year too long to these guys?
Yeah, I said it last year with Ezekiel Elliott. I mentioned that it was time to sell, and obviously got a lot of backlash. People don't like to hear that when you're looking at a running back that's top three or 4 overall in Dynasty. That might sound crazy, but now Ezekiel Elliott is RB11 in our ADP, and he's 20 overall. So, certainly you haven't lost it all. He's still a valuable player. I actually think he could bounce back and regain some of that value. But is he ever going to be a top 3 running back again? No, he's not. Not when it comes to value.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think he looks quite as good with the bare midriff right now as he did a couple of years ago either. But I mean, how many of us do really?
Right, exactly.
He is at RyanMC23 on Twitter. That's for Don Mattingly, a co-owner of DynastyLeagueFootball.com. Ryan, tell people where else to check out your work.
Yeah, it's all there on DLF. Check it out there, and on Twitter as well, and the podcast. There's a bunch of them. Locked On Dynasty, DLF Dynasty podcast, and the Commission Possible podcast.
Does your family think you talk too much?
I'm pretty quiet everywhere except when I'm doing a podcast, I think.
I guess so. With all those shows, you got to save it up.
That's right.
Well, thanks very much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
That's going to do it for this episode of our podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com now. You can check out the first 7 articles in our annual Dynasty Prospect Scouting Report series. Those are free to read. We will be adding another to the site just about every day up until the week of the NFL draft. And of course, you can find our 2021 rankings, the live MVP board, earlier than you have any other year, as long as you're a DS Insider. You can also find us on Twitter. We are at DraftSharks. I am at SchaufDS. It's SCHAUF. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. For Ryan McDowell and the entire Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.